What if I told you that the very thing you've been told is destroying your health might actually be the same thing keeping Olympic athletes on their feet? Yes, I'm talking about carbs. For decades, carbs have been cast as the villain, blamed for obesity, diabetes, heart disease, even cancer. But here's the shocking truth. Every single carbohydrate you eat, whether it comes from a candy bar or a plate of broccoli, ends up as the exact same molecule inside your body. That flips the entire good carb versus bad carb debate upside down, doesn't it? So why do some people thrive on carbs while others struggle with weight gain and metabolic issues? The answer isn't as simple as you've been led to believe. And once you understand what your body really does with carbohydrates, you'll see that the story isn't about poison. It's about power, timing, and balance. Welcome to the Wellness Way, where we uncover the truths about health that no one else dares to say out loud. Stick with me, because what you'll hear today will challenge everything you thought you knew about nutrition. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Your support keeps this channel alive and motivates us to bring you more eye-opening content. What if I told you that the single most misunderstood nutrient in your diet is also the one you probably can't stop eating? Carbohydrates, better known as carbs, are loved, hated, celebrated, and demonized all at the same time. One moment, they're fueling Olympic athletes to victory. The next, they're blamed for America's rising rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. If you've ever felt confused about whether carbs are your friend or your enemy, you're not alone. I was there too. For years I thought carbs were the bad guys hiding in bread, pasta, and desserts, secretly plotting to make me gain weight and wreck my health. But the more I learned, the more I realized the story isn't that simple. Here's the part that shocked me the most. No matter what kind of carbohydrate you eat, whether it's a spoonful of table sugar, a sweet piece of fruit, or a serving of brown rice, your body breaks it down into the exact same thing: glucose. That's right. The molecule floating in your bloodstream after eating candy is identical to the one from a so-called superfood. And your body doesn't label one as good and the other as bad. To your cells, glucose is glucose. That truth alone flips the entire good carb versus bad carb debate upside down. So how did carbs become such a polarizing subject? Part of it comes from oversimplified diet advice. We're told that simple carbs like sugar are evil, while complex carbs like whole grains are good. And while it's true that complex carbs digest more slowly and don't spike blood sugar as quickly, the ultimate fate of both is the same. They end up as glucose, ready to be used as fuel. The question isn't whether carbs are inherently harmful. The real question is how much you eat, when you eat them, and how your lifestyle uses them. Think about this. An elite marathon runner can down packets of sugary gels during a race and not gain an ounce of fat because their muscles are burning through glucose as fast as it's delivered. Meanwhile, a sedentary office worker who sips soda at their desk might store those same sugars as fat, simply because their body has nowhere to put the excess energy. It's not that the sugar molecules are different, it's that the context is. That was my light bulb moment. Carbs don't ruin your health by default. It's the mismatch between intake and activity that creates the problem. To understand this better, imagine your body has gas tanks designed specifically for carbs. One tank sits in your liver and another in your muscles. They store glucose in the form of glycogen, a kind of quick access energy reserve. When you exercise, you dip into those tanks. When you eat carbs, you refill them. But here's the catch. Those tanks are limited. Your liver can store around 90 to 100 grams of glycogen, and your muscles can hold about 400 grams. Once those tanks are full, any extra carbs get converted into fat and stored in adipose tissue. That's where the trouble begins. Now here's what makes this fascinating. For someone who works out consistently, those tanks are never really full. They're constantly being drained and refilled. Carbs flow in, get used, and the cycle repeats. For someone who rarely moves, the tanks fill up quickly and stay full. Every extra dose of carbs has no choice but to turn into fat. This is why athletes can eat plates of pasta without consequences, while the rest of us might struggle with our waistlines after a single dessert. It's not about carbs being good or bad. It's about whether your lifestyle creates room for them. This perspective also explains why demonizing sugar as poison doesn't quite capture the truth. Yes, sugary foods can spike blood sugar rapidly and often come with little to no nutritional value. That's why they're often called empty calories. And yes, over time, too many sugary foods can lead to weight gain, cravings, and increased risk of chronic diseases. But the glucose from sugar is chemically identical to the glucose from vegetables. The difference lies in how fast it enters the bloodstream and how easily it can push you into a calorie surplus. In other words, the sugar itself isn't a direct toxin. It's the overconsumption and imbalance that make it harmful. I'll admit, when I first heard this, it almost felt like betrayal. All those years of hearing sugar is poison or bread makes you fat suddenly felt too simplistic. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Carbs aren't villains. They're tools. Just like a hammer can build a house or break a window, carbs can fuel athletic performance or contribute to disease depending on how they're used. And this brings me back to my own experience. For a long time, I avoided carbs like the plague. I skipped bread, cut down on fruit, and even tried going keto for a while. But I noticed something. My workouts felt sluggish, my recovery was slower, and I constantly craved the foods I had banned. When I started reintroducing carbs strategically, timing them around exercise, choosing whole food sources, and keeping an eye on portion sizes, I felt a difference. My energy returned, my workouts improved, and my relationship with food became healthier. It wasn't about cutting carbs completely. It was about learning to work with them instead of against them. That's why I believe we need to rethink the way we talk about carbs. Instead of labeling them as inherently good or bad, we should ask, how do they fit into your life? Are you active enough to use them, or are you overloading tanks that are already full? Are you choosing carbs that come with fiber, vitamins, and minerals, or are you filling up on empty calories? Once you shift the conversation from carbs are evil to carbs are context dependent, everything changes. So here's the shocking truth I want you to walk away with. Carbs aren't out to get you. They're not poison, and they're not magic either. They're fuel. The challenge is learning how to manage that fuel in a way that matches your body's needs and your lifestyle. Because when you do, carbs stop being the enemy and start being the ally they were always meant to be. When I first started learning about how the body actually processes carbohydrates, it felt like pulling back the curtain on a stage play I thought I knew by heart. The story begins with something as ordinary as a meal, a plate of pasta, a slice of cake, maybe even a glass of milk. To us, it looks like food, but to the body, it's a puzzle that must be broken apart piece by piece before it can be used. Picture yourself taking that first bite. The carbs don't just vanish into energy instantly. They begin their journey in your mouth, where enzymes in your saliva start snipping away at long chains of sugar molecules. As you chew, you're not just tasting, you're kick-starting chemistry. From there, the food slides down into your stomach, where it's churned and blended like dough in a giant mixer. But the real magic happens when the carbs reach your small intestine. That's where specialized enzymes, almost like locksmiths, crack open each type of carbohydrate. Lactase breaks down lactose from milk into smaller sugars. Sucrase splits sucrose into glucose and fructose. And for anyone who doesn't produce enough lactase, those undigested carbs cause bloating, cramps, and discomfort. Suddenly, something as innocent as ice cream turns into a problem. This process makes you realize why people often separate carbs into simple and complex. Simple carbs, like table sugar, break down quickly, flooding the bloodstream with glucose in minutes. Complex carbs, like potatoes or brown rice, unravel slowly, releasing glucose over time. That's why nutrition experts often recommend complex carbs. They deliver steadier energy. But here's the twist that still surprises people. No matter how they start, every carb eventually ends up as glucose. Your small intestine absorbs it, funnels it into the bloodstream, and sends it straight to the liver, where another layer of transformation takes place. The liver is like the border patrol for your blood. Every carb you eat, whether from a soda or a salad, passes through it. And the liver has one simple rule. Fructose and galactose aren't allowed to roam freely. They get converted into glucose before being released. That's why we never talk about blood fructose levels or blood galactose levels. The body cares only about blood glucose. In other words, the sugar from a candy bar and the sugar from an apple arrive in your bloodstream looking exactly the same. That's a fact most diet debates completely ignore. So if that's true, why do people still say sugar is so bad for you? The answer comes down to context and consequences. A glucose molecule may be the same no matter where it came from, but the way it enters your systems and what it brings along for the ride changes everything. A spoonful of table sugar rushes in fast, spikes your blood sugar, and leaves nothing behind but empty calories. A serving of oats arrives more slowly, packaged with fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Both give you glucose, but one comes with baggage that makes you hungrier, and the other comes with benefits that keep you full. This is where the story shifts from chemistry to real life. Imagine two friends. One is a professional athlete, the other spends most of their day at a desk. They both eat the same sugary snack. For the athlete who just finished a grueling practice, that sugar goes straight into refilling empty glycogen stores in their muscles. It's fuel, absorbed and used almost instantly. For the office worker, whose glycogen tanks are already full from sitting all day, the sugar has nowhere to go but into fat storage. Same snack, same glucose, completely different outcome. That's why I say carbs are neither heroes nor villains. They're mirrors reflecting how we live. When I look back at my own habits, I see this clearly. On days when I barely moved, I could feel how sugar made me crash. A soda at lunch gave me a quick high, but by mid-afternoon I was exhausted and craving more. My body didn't need the extra glucose, so it stored it away, and I felt worse. But on days when I exercised hard, carbs felt different. A banana after a run wasn't junk. It was exactly what my muscles needed to recover. I wasn't gaining fat. I was refilling my tanks. That contrast taught me that carbs don't act alone. They respond to the rhythm of your lifestyle. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some argue that all sugar is toxic no matter what. They point to rising rates of obesity and diabetes and say the evidence is clear. But I think that argument misses the nuance. Sugar in moderation, especially when paired with physical activity, isn't inherently poisonous. The problem is overconsumption in a sedentary society. It's not the molecule itself, it's the mismatch between intake and use. To me, saying sugar is pure poison is like saying water is dangerous because you can drown in it. The statement has truth, but it lacks perspective. So where does that leave us? For me, it's about making practical choices that respect how carbs work in the body. If you're active, don't fear carbs. Use them. Time them around your workouts, choose whole food sources and let them fuel your performance. If you're less active, scale back. Prioritize complex carbs with fiber to keep you full and satisfied, and limit foods that dump sugar into your system too quickly. And remember, there are moments when simple carbs aren't just okay. They're necessary. A person with dangerously low blood sugar needs them immediately. An athlete in the final stretch of a competition relies on them for that last burst of energy. That's the beauty of understanding carbs. Once you see the bigger picture, you stop fearing them and start managing them. They're not destiny. They're not doom. They're simply fuel, waiting to be used in the right way. As the debate over carbs rages on, it's impossible not to notice how diet culture shapes the way we see food. Over the past decade, we've watched wave after wave of trends rise and fall. First, it was low-fat diets, promising that cutting fat would solve the obesity crisis. Then it was Atkins, and later keto, telling us carbs were the real villains. In between came intermittent fasting, paleo, plant-based movements, all presenting themselves as the ultimate solution. Each trend found its loyal followers and its critics, and each left behind a trail of confusion for the rest of us, just trying to figure out what to eat for dinner. Carbs, in particular, seem to carry the heaviest baggage. They're framed as addictive, inflammatory, even poisonous. And yet, some of the longest-living populations in the world, like those in Okinawa, Japan, or parts of the Mediterranean, thrive on diets rich in carbohydrates. That contradiction forces us to ask, how can carbs be the enemy if entire cultures live long, healthy lives with carbs at the center of their meals? The answer, I think, lies not in demonizing a single nutrient, but in looking at the bigger picture. When researchers study these long-lived communities, they don't find people surviving on soda and processed sweets. They find people eating whole grains, sweet potatoes, beans, fruits and vegetables, foods that provide carbs along with fiber, vitamins and minerals. They also find people who move their bodies daily, whether through farming, walking or physical labor. It's not carbs in isolation that matter. It's carbs in context. This realization changed the way I think about my own future. I used to believe that to stay healthy, I had to fight against carbs, always restricting, always calculating. But that mindset kept me in a constant battle with food, feeling guilty whenever I slipped. Now I see carbs differently. They're not a trap waiting to spring. They're a tool I can learn to use wisely. On days when I know I'll be active, I allow myself more. On quieter days, I pull back. Instead of rigid rules, I've learned balance, and it feels far more sustainable. Looking ahead, I believe this is where the conversation about carbs needs to go, toward personalization. The truth is, no single carb strategy works for everyone. An endurance athlete needs far more than a sedentary office worker. A person managing diabetes needs a different plan than someone training for a triathlon. What works for me may not work for you, and that's okay. The danger lies in trying to apply one-size-fits-all rules to something as dynamic as human metabolism. This is also where the future of nutrition could get exciting. With technology advancing, we may soon have tools that let us see, in real time, how our bodies respond to different foods. Continuous glucose monitors are already becoming popular outside of medical settings. Imagine eating a meal and watching your blood sugar respond on your phone within minutes. You'd quickly learn which foods fuel you well and which leave you drained. Instead of arguing over diet dogmas, we could move toward data-driven, personalized eating. But while science moves forward, the cultural conversation still matters. We can't let fear drive us into extremes. Carbs are not going away. They've been part of human diets for thousands of years, from rice in Asia to bread in Europe to corn in the Americas. What needs to change is the way we frame them, not as villains, but as a part of the puzzle. The question isn't, are carbs bad? The question is, how can I use carbs to support my body, my goals, and my lifestyle? I often think about the younger generation bombarded with diet advice on social media. One influencer swears by keto, another by veganism, another says intermittent fasting cured all their problems. It's overwhelming. If there's one message I wish they could hear, it's this. Don't fear carbs, don't idolize them either. Learn how they work, pay attention to your body, and use them with intention. That mindset frees you from guilt and gives you control back over your choices. So here's where I want to leave you, with an open question that only you can answer. What role do carbs play in your life right now? Are they fueling your energy, your workouts, your creativity, or are they dragging you down, making you tired, pushing you toward cravings? That answer won't come from a diet book or a YouTube video. It comes from observation, reflection, and honesty about how you live. And that's why this conversation doesn't end here. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the big question. How many carbs do you really need? And could you live without them altogether? That discussion will take us into ketosis, ketogenic diets, and whether athletes can thrive without carbs at all. But for now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe carbs are the problem, or do you see them as misunderstood? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know your perspective. Let's keep this conversation alive, because the more we talk about it, the closer we get to real answers. And if you found value here, consider subscribing to this channel. Your support not only fuels my work, but helps build a community where we can explore these truths together. When we strip away the myths, the fear, and the endless diet wars, what's left is a much simpler truth. Carbs are fuel. They are not poison, and they are not magic. They are molecules your body knows exactly how to use. Whether they become your greatest ally or your biggest challenge depends on how you eat them, when you eat them, and how you live your life. For me, realizing this felt like taking off a pair of foggy glasses I had been wearing for years. I used to see carbs as an enemy I had to fight, constantly restricting and second-guessing myself. That mindset didn't make me healthier. It made me anxious, guilty, and disconnected from my own body. When I began to understand how carbs actually worked, the picture changed. I stopped fearing them and started respecting them. I realized that a bowl of oatmeal before a workout wasn't a threat, but a gift of steady energy. I realized that enjoying fruit didn't make me weak. It nourished me. And yes, I realized that too much soda or candy could drag me down, but that didn't mean I had to live in constant fear of sugar. The lesson I've taken is balance. Balance doesn't mean perfection. It means aligning what I eat with how I live. On days when I move more, I eat more carbs and use them well. On days when I'm less active, I scale back. This simple adjustment has changed my energy, my mood, and my relationship with food. And I believe it can do the same for anyone willing to step back from the extremes and look at carbs with fresh eyes. Applying this lesson in daily life doesn't require complicated rules or expensive diets. It means listening to your body. It means asking, do I need quick energy right now, or do I need steady fuel? It means choosing foods that nourish, not just satisfy cravings. And above all, it means giving yourself permission to enjoy food without guilt, because guilt never made anyone healthier. As we move forward, I encourage you to see carbs not as something to fear, but as something to manage wisely. Just like money, time, or energy, carbs are a resource. Spend them carefully, and they'll support you. Waste them carelessly, and they may hold you back. But ultimately, you are in control. So now I want to turn the question over to you. How do carbs show up in your life? Do they fuel you, or do they weigh you down? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this conversation resonated with you, please subscribe to The Wellness Way. Your support not only helps this channel grow, but also gives me the motivation to keep creating content that digs deeper into the truths about health and nutrition. Together, we can keep learning, questioning, and finding better ways to take care of ourselves.